there is a specific kind of woman who does not leave when she finds out. She stays, she folds the laundry, she makes the coffee, she kisses her husband goodbye at the door and watches his car disappear around the corner, and then she sits at the kitchen table, opens her laptop, and begins to dismantle his entire life with the same quiet efficiency she once used to build it. Cora Whitfield was that woman. She was 31 years old, a logistics coordinator for a mid-size shipping company in Calgary, which meant she was professionally trained to move large things without anyone noticing. She was good at her job. She was better at her marriage, or so she had believed for 6 years, until a Tuesday in February when she found a receipt tucked into the breast pocket of her husband's navy peacoat. It wasn't for flowers. It wasn't for dinner. It was for a hotel room. The Fairmont downtown, one night. One room, 2 glasses of champagne from the minibar. Cora stood in the laundry room for a long time, holding that receipt. The washer was running. The dryer was tumbling. The sound of domestic life humming all around her, indifferent. She put the receipt back exactly where she found it. She moved the coat to the wash pile. She went upstairs, made herself a cup of chamomile tea, and sat at the window watching the snow fall on the street below. She didn't cry. She had always found crying to be a waste of what could be very productive time. Her husband's name was Theo. Not the Theo in the file, a different one entirely. His full name was Theodore Bancroft, and he was a commercial real estate broker with a firm jaw, an expensive haircut, and a habit of checking his reflection in storefront windows when he thought no one was watching. He was the kind of man who introduced himself at parties by his profession before his name, Theo Bancroft, commercial real estate, as if the city itself were a ledger and he were its accountant. They had met at a charity gala for the Bow River Conservation Trust. He had been funny, he had been attentive. He had looked at her like she was the only interesting thing in a room full of interesting things. 6 years ago, Cora had mistaken that look for love. She understood now that it was the same look he gave properties, acquisitive, calculating, already planning the renovation. She had found the receipt on a Tuesday. By Wednesday she had installed a quiet monitoring app on the family iPad that synced with his phone backup. By Friday she knew the woman's name, Sabine. She was 26, a junior associate at a competing firm. Her Instagram was public. She liked matcha lattes and authentic travel experiences, and posting photos from rooftop patios with captions that said things like "the view is better up here." Cora closed the Instagram page. She didn't feel rage, not exactly. She felt something colder, something architectural. She felt the structure of the last 6 years quietly recalibrating itself around a new truth. She made another cup of tea and opened a new browser tab. The apartment they lived in was a sleek 2-bedroom in Eau Claire. The kind of place with exposed concrete ceilings and a building concierge who remembered your coffee order. It was listed in both their names. The savings account at TD was joint. The investment portfolio was joint. The lease on Theo's Audi was in his name. The lease on her Subaru was in hers. The small landscape photography business she ran on weekends, the one Theo called your little hobby, was registered solely under Cora Whitfield Visuals Inc. She had incorporated it 2 years ago, mostly for tax purposes. Theo had signed the paperwork without reading it, sliding it across the kitchen counter with his eyes still on the hockey game. "You're the detail person," he had said, which was the most accurate thing he ever said about her. Over the next 3 months, Cora became a ghost in her own life. She smiled over dinners. She asked about his deals. She listened to him talk about square footage and cap rates and the Sabine situation, which he mentioned once, obliquely, as a work thing. And she had simply nodded and refilled his wine glass and watched him relax back into the comfortable delusion that she didn't know. Meanwhile, she moved very carefully. She opened a new personal account at a different bank, one Theo had no connection to. She redirected her direct deposit. She began quietly transferring her share of their joint savings in small, unremarkable amounts, just under the threshold that would trigger an automated alert. She was a logistics coordinator. She understood thresholds. She called her cousin Amara, who was a family law paralegal in Edmonton, and who, when Cora explained the situation, said only, "Don't confront him until you have everything. Promise me." Cora promised. She had never broken a promise in her life. She photographed the receipt. She photographed the hotel loyalty points on his account, accessed through the iPad backup. She compiled a folder of message threads, dozens of them, a year's worth of carefully constructed lies, each one polished to a shine. Each one a little window into the life he had been running in parallel to hers. She called a real estate lawyer. She called a divorce attorney, a woman named Adrienne, who came recommended by Amara and who had the steady, level voice of someone who had heard every version of this story and remained unshocked by all of them. The condo, Adrienne told her during their first meeting, is the key asset. If you want to leave cleanly, you need to control the timing of that conversation. Cora nodded. She had already been thinking about the condo. In April, on a Saturday when Theo was at a site visit, she had coffee with the building manager, a practical woman named Mrs. Osi, who had lived in the building for 12 years and who knew every tenant's business and nobody's secrets. Cora had helped Mrs. Osi fill out a complicated insurance form the previous winter. Mrs. Osi owed her a favor. The conversation was brief and quiet and extremely useful. By May, the plan was complete. Cora had moved her most important belongings to Amara's place in phases, one box at a time, always when Theo was out. A winter coat here. Her grandmother's china there. Her photography equipment, piece by piece, wrapped in bubble wrap and carried to the car under the pretense of going to a weekend shoot. She was good at this. She had been moving things invisibly her entire career. The day she chose was a Friday in June. Theo had told her he was going to Vancouver for a conference. He had told her this 2 weeks in advance, casually, over breakfast. He had not known, when he said it, that Cora had already spoken with the concierge, already arranged for the moving company, already texted Sabine's building address to Adrian for the formal notice that would be served that same afternoon. Theo landed in Vancouver at noon. He checked into the Westin. He texted Cora a photo of the view from his room. Mountain, water, blue sky, beautiful out here, thinking of you. She read the message. She looked up at the two movers carrying her gray sectional sofa through the apartment door, and then she set her phone face down on the kitchen counter and kept working. By 4 o'clock, the apartment was a different place. Not empty, she wasn't vindictive. She had left his furniture, his kitchen things, his clothes. But everything that was hers was gone. The photographs she'd taken and framed and hung on every wall. The Turkish rug from her parents' house. The Le Creuset pots she'd bought with her first real paycheck. The small details that had made a unit feel like a home. She looked around at what remained. It looked like a show suite, neutral, impersonal, a space waiting for an occupant. She left one thing on the kitchen counter, not a note, a folder. Inside the folder was a printed copy of the formal separation agreement Adrian had drawn up, already signed by Cora on her indicated lines. Beside the signature, she had written a single sentence in her own handwriting, the same neat print she used for shipping manifests and photography labels. The joint account has been split per the agreement. Your lawyer has already received a copy. I wish you clarity. She did not say she wished him well. She was a detail person. She meant exactly what she wrote. She took the elevator down, thanked the concierge, and walked out onto the street into the long golden light of a June evening in Calgary. She got in the Subaru. She drove to Amara's place. She ate leftover pasta and drank a glass of wine and watched an episode of a British baking show and went to sleep at 10 o'clock. She slept better than she had in 3 months. Theo's flight landed back in Calgary on Sunday evening. He took the cab from the airport, the way he always did, already mentally composing the story he would tell Cora about Vancouver, the details he would include and the ones he would leave out. The cab pulled up to the building. He rode the elevator up. He put his key in the lock. The key still worked. She had not changed the lock on him. That would have been petty. What she had done was worse. He walked into the apartment and stood in the entrance and turned on the light and looked at the walls. The photographs were gone. 12 of them, all taken by Cora, all framing a life they had built together. White rectangles remained where they had hung, bright against the slightly yellowed paint around them. Ghost frames. He walked into the living room. The Turkish rug was gone. The sectional was replaced by his old black leather couch from before they moved in together, which had been in storage and which he had completely forgotten he still owned until this moment, when it suddenly appeared in the center of the room like an accusation. He went to the kitchen. He saw the folder. He read the agreement. He read it again. He sat down on the floor because there were no chairs at the kitchen table, because the chairs had been hers, and he read it a third time, his finger tracing the line of her signature. The unfamiliar efficient print that had always seemed like such a small thing about her, and now seemed like the truest thing. He called her phone. The number you have dialed is not accepting calls at this time. She had not canceled her number. She had simply blocked his. He found this detail later to be the most devastating one. Not the rug, not the money, not the agreement, the block, because it was so calm, because it required such deliberate action, the physical act of going into her contacts, finding his name and choosing, with perfect composure, to make him unreachable to her. He called her work number. It went to voicemail. He called Amara, who he had always found vaguely intimidating at family dinners, and who answered on the second ring and said, in the pleasantly professional voice of someone who had been waiting for this specific call, "She's fine, Theo. The agreement is fair. I suggest you find a lawyer. Have a good evening." Then she hung up. He sat on his old leather couch in his stripped apartment and opened his laptop and pulled up the TD account and saw the current balance. It was exactly what the separation agreement described. Not a dollar more or less. He checked the investment account. Same. Cora had been meticulous. She was always meticulous. He had always found her meticulousness slightly dull. He understood now that it was a kind of power he had never had the vocabulary to name. He called Sabine. Sabine answered on the third ring, her voice warm and slightly surprised. "Theo, I thought you weren't back until tomorrow." He said he needed to see her. He said everything had fallen apart. He said he was alone and he needed somewhere to go tonight. Could he come over? There was a pause on the line that lasted just long enough to feel like a reclassification. Sabine said carefully, "I have people over right now. It's not a great time. Are you okay?" He told her it was serious. He told her his wife had left. Another pause. "Theo," Sabine said, and her voice had shifted entirely. The warmth replaced by something polite and retreating. Something that sounded very much like a door beginning to close. "I think we should talk when things are calmer. This sounds like a lot right now." He stared at the phone after she hung up. He had not thought of himself as a man who could be hung up on twice in the same evening. The next 2 weeks were a specific kind of education. His lawyer, a man named Garrett who specialized in family law and who Theo reached through a colleague, reviewed the separation agreement and called Theo back with the news that it was, in his professional opinion, airtight. Cora had been working on it since March. It reflected an equitable split of all shared assets, division of the joint savings, and a buyout of her share of the condo's equity, which she had quietly appraised in April during the open house she had attended as "just looking." The appraisal matched the current market to within $3,000. Garrett told him this with a tone of reluctant admiration that Theo found deeply irritating. He asked about contesting it. Garrett told him that, given the documented evidence of his infidelity, which Adrian had assembled in a separate supporting file, contesting would likely cost more in legal fees than he would recover, and would involve a very public disclosure of communications he might not want aired in family court. He used the word communications in the way lawyers use it to mean things you wrote on a phone that you believed were private and are now Exhibit A. Theo did not contest the agreement. He signed it on a Thursday in a Garrett's office on 8th Avenue with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and a glass of water he had not touched in front of him. He signed it the way a man signs something when he is trying to look like he is choosing to do it, rather than being left with no other option. He uncapped the pen. He paused. He signed. Cora was at work when Garrett's office called Adrian to confirm. She was rerouting a shipping delay out of the port of Vancouver when her phone lit up with Adrian's number. She stepped away from her desk, walked to the window at the end of the hall and answered. "It's done," Adrian said. "Good," Cora said. She stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the Calgary skyline, the way the light hit the glass towers in the late morning, all that reflected sky. Then she went back to her desk and finished the shipping reroute. She was good at her job. She had always been good at her job. Now here is what Theo never knew. What he could not have known, because he had never paid close enough attention to know it. 18 months before the receipt in the peacoat, Cora's photography had begun to sell. Not her weekend hobby snaps, not the wedding jobs she took occasionally for the money. Her landscape work, wide-format prints of the Alberta Badlands, the ice fields, the coulees north of Lethbridge in the blue hour. A commercial gallery in Kensington had approached her. Then a hotel chain that was furnishing 4 new properties and wanted original Alberta photography for their lobbies. Then a licensing agency for commercial use. Cora had said nothing to Theo about any of it. Not because she was hiding it exactly. More because every time she had tried to bring it up, he had pivoted back to his own deals, his own numbers, his own accelerating certainty that the world was primarily organized around his momentum. She had learned to hold her life in quieter compartments. The Cora Whitfield Visuals Inc. account, the one she had incorporated while Theo watched hockey, had grown significantly. The hotel contracts alone were 5 figures. The licensing residuals came in monthly. She had reinvested most of it through a financial planner Theo had never met, a woman named Dr. O.C.'s niece, as it turned out, who had advised her without judgment and without questions about where the money had come from or where it was going. By the time Cora left the condo, the business she had built inside the margins of her marriage was profitable enough that she did not need to work in logistics if she chose not to. She chose to keep the logistics job at least for another year. She liked the work. She liked having a reason to leave the house in the morning that was entirely her own. She had found a new apartment in Inglewood, walking distance from the river. It had big north-facing windows which were good for a photographer, and a second bedroom she used as a studio. She had hung her own photographs on every wall. There was no white space left anywhere. The apartment looked like a life, not a show suite. She called her mother on her first night there. Her mother, a no-nonsense woman from Hamilton who had once driven through a snowstorm to repossess a lawn-mower she had lent to a neighbor who moved away without returning it, said simply, "Good. Now what?" Cora looked around the apartment. The prints on the walls, the Le Creuset pots in the kitchen, the Turkish rug anchoring the living room. Outside the window, the Elbow River was catching the last of the day's light. She had a shoot in Drumheller next Saturday. She had a meeting with the licensing agency the following Tuesday. She had a gallery show coming up in September that she had been quietly preparing for over the past year. Work that was entirely and completely hers. Made in the early mornings before Theo woke up, and on the long weekends she told him were for hiking, but were really for shooting light. She could never explain to someone who had never learned to wait for it. Now, Cora said, "I just keep going." And that was the part Theo would never understand. He thought the leaving was the act. He thought the signed agreement, and the stripped apartment walls, and the blocked number, were the culmination of her response to his betrayal. He thought she had reached the end of a road. He did not understand, and would not understand for a long time, that Cora had not been running away from him. She had been running towards something she had been building in plain sight while he was looking elsewhere. He would hear about the gallery show in September, through a mutual friend. He would stand in front of a piece in a magazine preview, a photograph of a prairie storm cell, taken from a gravel road outside Vulcan, the clouds so large and dark and full of intent they looked like a judgment, and he would recognize the byline and feel something he would spend weeks trying to name and eventually settle on, quietly and without telling anyone, as grief. Not for the marriage. For the woman he had been too careless to actually see. There are men who mistake a woman's stillness for surrender. They misread patience as passivity. They take the smoothly run household, the gracefully managed dinner, the seamlessly organized logistics of a shared life, and they conclude, from all that quiet competence, that there is nothing underneath it. Nothing driving it. Nothing watching. They are the same men who will stand in a stripped apartment one Sunday evening, with a folder on the counter, and a leather couch from a storage unit they forgot they owned, and experience, for the first time in their adult lives, the specific vertigo of a person who has spent years standing on a foundation that someone else built and has just been politely informed that the architect has moved on. Cora Whitfield did not take everything. She was not a woman who needed to leave wreckage to confirm her departure. She took what was hers. She left what was his. She moved forward with the competence and the clarity and the unflinching forward motion of someone who had spent her entire career learning how to move large things without anyone noticing. The receipt in the peacoat was not the beginning of the end, it was just the moment she stopped waiting for something she had already decided to build, without him.